I was on my way to Washington, D.C. on a business trip on July 22nd. Everything seemed normal until we landed in Denver for a plane change. As I was retrieving my items from the overhead bin, an announcement was made for Mr. Lloyd Glenn to visit the United Customer Service representative as soon as possible. I didn't think anything of it until I got to the plane's exit door and heard a gentleman question every male if they were Mr. Glenn. I realized something was wrong at this moment, and my heart sunk. When I stepped off the plane, a sad young guy approached me and said, "Mr. Glenn, there's an emergency at your home. I'm not sure what the situation is or who is involved, but I'll escort you to the phone so you may contact the hospital." My heart was now hammering, but the need to remain calm won out. Woodenly, I followed this guy to a distant phone and dialed the mission hospital number he provided me. My call was routed to the trauma center, where I heard that my 3-year-old son had been caught beneath the automatic garage door for several minutes and was dead when my wife discovered him. CPR was started by a neighbor who's a doctor, and paramedics maintained the treatment while Brian was being transferred to the hospital. Brian had been awakened by the time I called, and they felt he would survive, but they didn't know how much damage had been done to his brain or heart. They explained that the door had closed entirely on his little sternum, just over his heart. He'd been suffocated to death. My wife sounded apprehensive, but not panicked after conversing with the medical professionals, and I took comfort in her steadiness. The return flight seemed to take an eternity, yet I arrived at the hospital 6 hours after the garage door had been closed. Nothing could have prepared me for seeing my small boy resting so still on a large bed with tubes and monitors all over the place when I came into the intensive care unit. He was breathing through a mask. I looked at my wife, who was standing and trying to offer me a reassuring smile. Everything seemed like a nightmare. I was filled in on the specifics and given a cautious outlook. Brian was going to live, and preliminary tests showed that his heart was fine, which were both miracles in and of themselves. But only time would tell if his brain had been harmed. My wife remained calm over the apparently endless hours. She was confident that Brian would be fine in the end. I clutched her words and trust like a lifeline. Brian was unconscious the entire night and the next day. It seemed like an eternity had passed since I'd left for my work trip the day before. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, our son recovered consciousness and sat up, delivering the most beautiful words I'd ever heard spoken. "Daddy, hold me," he whispered, reaching for me with his little arms, crying, smiling. He was declared to have no neurological or physical disabilities the next day, and word of his amazing survival spread throughout the hospital. When we brought Brian home, we felt a special appreciation for the life and love of our Heavenly Father that only comes to those who are close to death. There was a particular mood in our home in the days that followed. Our 2 children were considerably more attached to their younger sibling. My wife and I were considerably closer to each other, and our entire family was very tight. Life began to move at a slower pace. Perspective appeared to be more focused, and the balance appeared to be much easier to achieve and maintain. We felt quite fortunate. Our appreciation was heartfelt. The story does not end here. On the day of the accident, almost a month later, Brian awakened from his afternoon sleep and said, "Sit down, Mommy. I have a message for you." Brian normally spoke in short words at this point in his life, so hearing him say a full sentence astonished my wife. She sat next to him on his bed, and he began telling her his sacred and astonishing story. "Do you recall when I was stuck beneath the garage door? It was quite hefty, and it stung a lot. I tried to phone you, but you couldn't hear me. I started crying, but it hurt too much. Then came the birdies." "The birdies?" my wife inquired, perplexed. "Yes," he said. "The birds flew inside the garage, making a whooshing sound. They looked after me." "Did they?" "Yes," he said emphatically. "One of the birds swooped down and grabbed you. She came to inform you that I'd become trapped beneath the door. The room was filled with a pleasant, reverent feeling. The spirit was both powerful and light as air. My wife recognized that because a 3-year-old has no idea of death or spirits. He was referring to the entities who came to him from beyond as birdies because they were flying through the air like birds. "How did the birdies look?" she inquired. "They were really gorgeous," Brian replied. "They were all dressed in white. Some of them sported green or white hair. However, several of them were dressed entirely in white." "Have they said anything?" "Yes," he said. "They assured me that the baby would be fine." "The baby?" my wife inquired, perplexed. Brian responded, "The infant is on the garage floor. You came out, opened the garage door, and hurried to the infant," he said. "You told the baby not to leave." My wife nearly fainted when she heard this, because she'd gone and knelt beside Brian's body, seeing his crushed chest and whispering, "Don't leave us, Brian. Please stay if you're able." She realized the soul had left his body and was looking down from above on this little lifeless form as she listened to Brian tell her the words she'd said. "So what happened?" she inquired. "We went on a trip far, far away," he explained. He became upset as he tried to express what he didn't seem to have the words for. My wife tried to soothe and comfort him, assuring him that everything will be fine. He fought with wanting to express something that was obviously extremely important to him, but he couldn't find the words. "We were flying swiftly in the air. They're really lovely, Mommy," he continued. "There are also a lot of birdies." My wife was taken aback. The pleasant, comfortable spirit engulfed her more solidly in her head, but with an urgency she had never known before. Brian went on to say that the birdies had instructed him he had to return and tell everyone about the birdies. He claimed that they returned him to his home and that a large fire vehicle and an ambulance were present. A man was carrying the baby out into a white bed, and he tried to convince him that the kid was well, but the man couldn't hear him. He claimed the birds informed him he had to accompany the ambulance, but that they would be nearby. He said they were so beautiful and serene that he didn't want to leave. Then there was a dazzling light. He stated that the light was both bright and warm, and that he adored the bright light. Someone approached him in the brilliant light and wrapped their arms around him, saying, "I love you, but you have to go back. You must play baseball and inform everyone about the birdies." The person in the bright light then kissed him and waved goodbye. Then whoosh came the tremendous sound, and they vanished into the skies. The narrative lasted an hour. He told us that birdies are always around, but we don't see them because we look with our eyes, and we don't hear them because we listen with our ears. They are, nevertheless, always present. They're only seen here. He put his hand over his heart. Because they love us so much, they whisper things to us to help us do the right thing. "I have a plan, Mommy," Brian continued. "You have a strategy. Daddy has a strategy. Everyone has a strategy. We must all follow through on our intentions and uphold our pledges. Because they adore us, the birdies assist us in our endeavor." In the weeks that followed, he frequently returned to us and told us all or part of what had happened, over and over. The plot was always the same. The particulars were never altered or out of sequence. He provided morsels of information and reiterated the message he had previously conveyed a few times. It never stopped to astonish us how he could tell us such specifics and speak beyond his capacity while discussing his birdies. He informed strangers about the birdies everywhere he went. Surprisingly, no one ever gave him an odd look when he did this. Rather, they always had a softer expression and smiled. Needless to say, we haven't been the same since, and I hope we never will be.